Hi, hello, and welcome, or welcome back, I suppose. I know we're not there yet, but I have been seeing all the Halloween decor popping up about the place, and I'm finding myself just getting in the mood for it. And when that comes to the channel, that means we're moving on to the weird books. We're not starting with horror per se, more of a thriller, I think, but there are certainly horrifying aspects to this book, but my point is, from now until Halloween, my plan is to get down and dirty with some creepy, spooky nonsense. And to kick things off, we're delving into Audition by Ryu Murakami, translated by Ralph McCarthy. Now, I knew of the film before knowing of the book, admittedly, but I am yet to actually watch the film, so there is no sort of influence. Like, the only thing I expected more from with this book was like it to be a lot more confusing, because I remember a lot of people talking about the film with it being confusing. But I likely will watch it after this, and I do think that I am going to be horrified by seeing a recreation of the final scene, but God, I dread to think how rough that's going to be. Especially knowing that Japanese films do tend to they rarely shy away from really visceral violence, but I am not a film reviewer, so let's get on to what we're meant to be actually talking about. I just wanted to get that out of the way, as I know a lot of people know this story because of the film. Audition follows a middle-aged man named Aoyama following the death of his wife. It's been a few years since, and after his son, Shiga, asks him why he doesn't find a new wife, that's exactly what he sets out to do. He brings this up to a friend, Yoshikawa, who works in the film industry. He suggests that they hold auditions for a film. Whether that film comes to fruition isn't really important, because the real goal is to find Aoyama a new wife, though none of the women know this. He is enamored by one woman's submission, and upon seeing her in person, he knows there can be nobody else. Yamasaki Asami is young, beautiful, and enigmatic in a way that hooks Aoyama in a way that he's never felt before. While those around him see that there seems to be something not quite right with her, his infatuation clouds his vision even when it turns much darker than anyone could possibly anticipate. The thing I love about the setup of this book, right up to the point where we actually meet Asami, is that it could easily be a setup in any number of genres. The idea of holding fake auditions as a pretense to find a wife is objectively a little bit funny. If Asami was normal, then this could easily have been the pretense to a rom-com, and the way his cohort Yamasaki acts kind of fits into a character style you would see in that genre too. It's a pretty easygoing setup, and if you went into this completely blind, it may take you a little longer to clock that there even is something wrong with her. But when we do meet Asami in the audition, I did feel there's something not quite right about her vibe that I couldn't really put my finger on, and in a lot of ways, like, it could all be easily explained with her youth or nerves or any number of things, because yes, she is in her 20s, I think her early to mid 20s, while he's in his 40s, and there is something to be said about the power play with that. I'll try to remember to come back to it later, but to me, it felt like she was already playing a part and saying exactly what she needed to. That's the only way I can explain it. There's a point where she's explaining that when she was a little younger, someone spotted her and tried to scout her to become a model, though it turned out to be for adult work rather than normal modelling. But there's something in the way she says, I was scouted? Is that what they call it? It just feels like it's said with like wide eyes, a slight smile, and a tilt of the head. She feels like she's just playing that part so well. She knows how to be appealing, but it's in the same way that a Venus flytrap secretes its sicky sap in order to lure bugs in and eat them alive. She's unassuming if you're in her grasp until it's much too late. And I did feel somewhat validated when the audition was over and Yoshikawa voiced his concern that something feels off with her, but even in this early stage, it is clearly too late for Aoyama just immediately he is taken in by her. The red flags only get more vivid and in higher number as the book goes on, but Aoyama always manages to find a way to make an excuse for her, right up to the point where he's physically unable to. Her former mentor died rather suddenly, and she talks as though he's still alive. But there is some wiggle room there as to how much she would know about this. He had an issue with womanizing, and it seems as though they never actually met in person, at least according to her. It's a similar story with her not knowing her mother and stepfather moved from where she believed them to be. Well, they were incredibly abusive towards her, so she would not really want to be keeping up with them. When her and Aoyama are on their first date, there is a wheelchair-bound man who comes into the restaurant who sees her and ends up in a state of absolute terror, but she claims not to know him, so to him it just must be something wrong with that man. It can't be anything to do with her. Even on their first night shared together, when he wakes up in a hotel alone and clearly having been drugged by her, he's all like, well, I'm sure there's a perfectly reasonable explanation to all this, and it's almost comical how blinded to it all he really is. Everyone around him says there is something weird and off with her and that he ought to be more careful, but he's having none of it. I often struggle to really feel for him because it wasn't just warning signs from her that he missed, which I think I would have a little more empathy for. So many people in his life keep telling him that she's not right. There's a screw loose somewhere or something. Cut your losses and move on. But she is like a drug to him. There is a fat cat on my foot. Good. I'm squish her now. Squish the baby. Squish, squish, squish. Good. And I think that's why I love this book so much. It isn't always obvious that she's a problem. You often can write things off in the same way that Aoyama does, and it isn't really hard to see why he falls for her. Most of us would probably fold in much the same way, even if it wouldn't fully escalate to the same point. The book is unsettling because it is, up until the final chapter, really quite grounded, and even in that last chapter, is not necessarily unrealistic, just rather more unlikely to happen than anything else in the book, given its rather violent nature. Asami knows what to say, when and how to say it, to lure you in perfectly. Even her sharing that she had an abusive childhood felt like it was said at exactly the right time to make Aoyama feel sorry for her and want to care for her all the more. And it's not even like her awful childhood didn't happen, it wasn't a lie, but it's just the perfect background that explains the sort of person she is today, but she tells it to him in such a way that makes her seem like a once poor little wounded animal that has managed to find healing and growth, just like he did when he was healing from the loss of his wife. She has power over him, but it's subtle. It isn't an obvious physical strength, but rather a more tactical intelligence that she uses to her advantage. And I love how Murakami plays with that power dynamic. Generally speaking, a woman much younger than her male counterpart would be on the receiving end of a power imbalance, and that could so easily have been the result if the audition had gone the way he hoped, given that all the women who auditioned were also like Asami in their 20s. But she knows that the best way to take control over a man is to make him feel like he's the one in charge. So she somewhat plays into the gentle, docile little lamb type. She's been hurt before, and she just needs someone who can make sure that that never happens again. Little do these men know that if anybody holds their attention that isn't her, they're as good as dead. She should be the only one. Even Aoyama having a son and a dog is too much for her, so she has to take charge. Or rather, she has to physically do something about it after playing all of her mental games. She could so easily fall into the trap of just being a femme fatale type. And to an extent, she is a femme fatale, but there's something about the nature of her violence in the end that turns her somewhat away from that type to me. She doesn't just lead him into dangerous scenarios, she is the dangerous scenario. And femme fatales to me are always more likely to stick to something like poison or a quick and simple end, but this is not Asami's game plan. She wants her victims to know what she is capable of and wants them to really suffer in the end, both physically and mentally, a great reflection of the torment she went through herself as a child. The idea of a femme fatale to me is a lot more sneaky in their acts of danger and violence. I recently have been I recently rewatched the Dark Knight trilogy, and Anne Hathaway's Catwoman is a femme fatale. The moment she leads Bruce Wayne, Batman, whichever, to Bane, the moment she leads him to Bane, that's an act of a femme fatale. She is not the one that is the danger there, but she perfectly leads him into a trap. This is not Asami. Asami is not the type to lead him somewhere if she is not the one. She is both Catwoman and she is both Catwoman and Bane in that scenario, if that makes sense. And that final scene is a depiction of real torment. The violence here is incredibly visceral and had me reeling back in my chair. From the moment she injected him under his tongue, I knew I was in for a rough ride, because there are so many places you can inject someone, but under the tongue is so... I don't even want to think about it. I will also say there is injury and death of a dog in this scene. I obviously did not enjoy that at all. I didn't enjoy any of it, but that in particular, I think we all understand. Animals cannot have done anything wrong because they don't choose to. They are made to, but it does work for the context of the story. Gangster, the beagle in question, is someone who takes Aoyama's affection away from Asami and also allows her to make sure Aoyama knows exactly how he's about to suffer at her hands. And her weapon of choice being a wire saw, the kind you use for butchering and meat, that makes for deep, cringe-inducing moments where you can almost feel what she's doing. There is a moment with an Achilles tendon that I just... it makes me curl up just thinking about it. The whole last scene is a sensory nightmare in every way and a great way to round everything off. My only complaint with it is that it's told via the narration in a way that we hadn't really had before this in quite the same way. There's no real speech from either of them. This makes sense for Aoyama, who physically can't speak for most of this scene, but the narration implies that he's being told things aloud by Asami, and it felt weird that she wasn't just saying them, but maybe that's something on a reread I could read more into. But I don't hate this choice, it just isn't my favourite. I was still right there in this scene, but I think for me it just felt a little more detached than I had felt with it sort of up to that point. However, regardless of that little thing with the last scene, I was utterly enraptured by this book. I think it has to be one of the best things I've read this year, and I know that isn't really a surprise. Murakami is a renowned author for a reason, but this is my first taste of his work, though I'm sure it won't be the last. I've already been meaning to read In the Miso Soup, and after reading this, I'm certainly more inclined to do so. Do you mind? There is a Zelda being a problem under my desk. What a fat little beast. Chunky monkey. Thank you. And like I said at the start of the video, I am on a spooky little kick from now until Halloween. I know what my next 2 reads are, but if you have any spooky scary books that you think should be on my list, then let me know in the comments below. They can be any kind of scary, though I do generally stay away from severe splatterpunk type stuff. I will not be reading anything like Playground or anything like that. My next read is gory, but I don't think it's anything quite like that. I'm reading Mayfly next, which I know is quite violent, but I don't think it's quite like anything like Playground. And I think my thing with Playground, as much as anything else, is that it's regarding children. I don't know if Mayfly is as well, because I know what her profession is before it sort of turns dark and violent, so you never know. But yeah, I won't be knowingly reading anything like Playground, because I just find that repulsive and I really don't see the appeal. But if there is, like I said, anything else, any kind of horror, old, new, anything in between, let me know and I'll check it out, or I'll see if I can check it out. But also, feel free to like, feel free to subscribe, and feel free to ring that notification bell. All the cringe shit I'm supposed to ask you to do in my videos. But most importantly, I hope you have a wonderful day, a wonderful night, a wonderful whenever you are watching this. Take good care of yourself. Right.